She never wanted to fight, just to survive another school without drawing attention. But when the bullies cornered her in the rain, they triggered a strength they couldn't begin to understand. Welcome to Tales by Ezra. Let's uncover what really happened. The old school bus wheezed to a stop, its doors groaning open like a tired beast, and Maya Alston stepped onto the cracked pavement of Northwood High. It was another new beginning, a phrase that had lost its shine somewhere around the 4-school transfer in 3 years. She clutched the straps of her worn backpack, a shield against the curious stares that always accompanied the label of new girl. Northwood wasn't an imposing fortress of academia, just a sprawling brick building that hummed with the chaotic energy of teenagers caught between childhood and whatever came next. Lockers slammed, distant shouts echoed from the gymnasium, and the air smelled faintly of floor wax and youthful anxiety. Maya's goal was simple, a mantra she repeated with every new school: blend in, be invisible, get through it. She wasn't looking for trouble, nor was she looking for friends. Experience had taught her that both could be equally complicated. Her quiet demeanor wasn't born of shyness, but of a deep, practiced discipline, a way of observing the world without becoming its focal point. She'd learned long ago that the quietest corners often offered the clearest views. As she navigated the crowded main hallway, a human river flowing in both directions, she noticed them almost immediately. They were a clique, easily identifiable by their confident swaggers, the way other students seemed to part for them like water around a rock, and the almost palpable aura of self-importance that clung to them. At the center was a tall, athletic-looking boy with a smirk that seemed permanently etched onto his face. She mentally tagged him as the ringleader. Flanking him were 2 girls whose laughter was a little too loud, a little too sharp, and a boy who seemed to be a slightly less polished echo of the leader. Maya had seen their type before, in every school, a predictable constellation of arrogance and insecurity. They thrived on attention, on the subtle fear they inspired. She made a mental note to give them a wide berth. The bell shrieked, a jarring summons to first period, and Maya found herself swept along with the current towards her assigned homeroom. She found a seat near the back, by a window overlooking a scraggly football field, and let her gaze drift, taking in the classroom dynamics. The teacher, a harried-looking man with kind eyes, droned on about school policies, but Maya was more interested in the silent language of her new peers. She saw the notes being passed, the furtive glances, the carefully constructed masks of boredom or engagement. It was a complex ecosystem, and she was, for now, an unclassified species. Her attention, however, was unwillingly drawn back to the clique she'd noticed earlier. They'd sauntered in late, unapologetic, and had taken over a cluster of desks near the front, their voices a low, disruptive hum. The ringleader, whose name she'd later learn was Kevin, caught her eye for a fleeting second. There was no malice in it, not yet, just a casual, dismissive assessment, the kind one might give to a piece of uninteresting furniture. Maya met his gaze briefly, her expression unreadable, before turning back to the window. She knew that look. It was the precursor, the silent sizing up before the first test. Her previous schools hadn't all been battlegrounds, but she'd learned to recognize the signs, the subtle shifts in atmosphere that heralded an unwelcome interest. It wasn't that she was a natural target. She was quiet, kept to herself, offered no provocation. But sometimes that very stillness, that lack of expected reaction, was provocation enough for those who fed on drama. Inside, Maya felt the familiar thrum of her training, the ingrained principles of her karate discipline. It wasn't about fighting. It was about balance, control, and the profound understanding that true strength was often silent. Her sensei, a wise old man whose hands were as gentle and healing as they were formidable in combat, had always emphasized that karate was a path to peace, a means of self-mastery, not a tool for aggression. The best fight, Maya, he used to say, his voice a low rumble, is the one you avoid. She carried those words with her, a guiding philosophy in the often turbulent waters of adolescence. She had no desire to prove anything to anyone at Northwood High. She just wanted to learn, to read, to exist without drawing the kind of attention that led to conflict. But as Kevin and his friends occasionally glanced her way, their whispers punctuated by snickers, a small, weary sigh escaped her. It seemed that in every new environment, the universe presented the same challenge: how to maintain one's peace when others seemed determined to disturb it. The day wore on, a blur of new faces, new classrooms, and the constant, low-level anxiety of navigating an unfamiliar social landscape. She ate her lunch alone, under a large oak tree at the edge of the school grounds, finding a measure of solace in the rustle of leaves and the relative anonymity of the open space. From this vantage point, she could see the cafeteria, a noisy, chaotic hub where Kevin's group held court at a central table, their laughter and loud pronouncements clearly marking their territory. Maya knew, with a certainty that settled in her stomach like a stone, that her period of invisibility was likely to be short-lived. They had noticed her, and in their world, the new and the quiet were often seen as opportunities for amusement. She wasn't afraid, not in the conventional sense. Her training had stripped away many of the common fears that plagued teenagers. But she was wary, tired of the anachronistic dance of dominance and submission that played out in school hallways across the country. She simply wanted to be left alone. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of her first day, Maya felt a sliver of relief. She had survived, unscathed. But as she walked towards the bus stop, a voice, laced with a mocking tone, cut through the afternoon air. Well, look what we have here. Little Miss Mute decided to grace us with her presence outside. It was Kevin, his smirk wider now, his eyes holding a challenging glint. His entourage was with him, their expressions mirroring his amusement. Maya stopped, turning slowly to face them, her backpack feeling suddenly heavier. The first test, it seemed, had arrived right on schedule. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the school parking lot as Maya faced Kevin and his cronies. Tiffany, one of the girls from his clique, a blonde with sharp features and an even sharper tongue, stepped forward slightly, her arms crossed. "Cat got your tongue, new girl? Or are you just too good to talk to us?" she sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. Maya kept her expression neutral, her eyes calm as she met Kevin's gaze. "I don't have any problem talking," she said, her voice even and low. "I just don't have anything to say to you right now." This wasn't the reaction they expected. They were used to fear, or stammering, or an attempt to scurry away. Maya's quiet composure seemed to throw Kevin off for a microsecond before his smirk returned, more forced this time. "Ooh, feisty," he said, drawing out the word. "We don't like feisty here, especially from nobodies who just crawled out from under a rock." His other companion, a lanky boy named Mark who mostly served as an echo, snickered on cue. Maya didn't rise to the bait. She knew this game. They wanted a reaction, any reaction, that they could then twist and use against her. Anger, fear, tears, it was all currency to them. "I'm not looking for any trouble," she stated simply, her gaze unwavering. "I just want to go home." Tiffany scoffed. "Trouble? Honey, you're trouble. Showing up here, thinking you can just ignore the way things work." She took another step closer, invading Maya's personal space. "Around here, new people show a little respect." Maya subtly shifted her weight, a movement so slight it was almost imperceptible, ensuring her balance was perfect. Her peripheral vision cataloged her surroundings, the distance to the nearest group of lingering students, the escape routes, the positioning of Kevin's friends. It was automatic, an ingrained habit from years of karate training where awareness, or zanshin, was paramount. "Respect is earned, not demanded by trying to intimidate someone," Maya replied, her voice still quiet but firm. This direct, albeit softly spoken, challenge seemed to genuinely surprise them. Mark's snicker died in his throat, and even Tiffany's aggressive posture wavered for a moment. Kevin's eyes narrowed. He wasn't used to being spoken to this way, especially by someone new, someone he had already categorized as insignificant. "You think you're tough?" he said, his voice losing some of its earlier mockery and taking on a harder edge. He took a step towards her, clearly intending to intimidate her with his size. Maya didn't flinch, didn't step back. She held his gaze. I think everyone deserves to be treated with basic decency. That's all I'm asking for. Other students, sensing a confrontation brewing, had started to linger at a distance, their conversations hushed. Some pulled out their phones, the universal reflex for potential drama. Maya was aware of them, but her focus remained on Kevin and his group. She could feel the familiar calm settling over her, the mental stillness her sensei had taught her to cultivate in moments of pressure. It wasn't an absence of feeling, but a channeling of it, a way to think clearly when adrenaline urged otherwise. Decency. Kevin spat the word out as if it were distasteful. Here's a lesson in Northwood decency for you. He reached out suddenly, aiming to snatch the strap of her backpack, a common bullying tactic meant to unbalance and humiliate. Maya's reaction was swift, economical, and almost too fast to follow. She didn't strike him. She didn't make a sound. As his hand came towards her, she sidestepped fractionally, her own hand coming up in a perfectly executed uke, a block that deflected his arm harmlessly. Simultaneously, her body flowed with the movement, creating distance. It was over in a second. Kevin stumbled slightly, his grab meeting empty air. He looked at his hand, then at Maya, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. Had she just moved incredibly fast, or had he misjudged? To the casual observer, it might have looked like he simply missed. But Maya knew, and perhaps a small part of Kevin suspected, that it was more than that. Tiffany and Mark looked momentarily bewildered. "What was that?" Tiffany asked, her voice losing some of its earlier bite. Maya straightened, her expression unchanged. "I believe you missed," she said, her tone devoid of sarcasm or triumph. She then turned, deliberately, and began to walk towards the bus stop again. She didn't run. She walked with the same measured pace as before. Kevin stared after her, his face flushed. He had been made to look clumsy and in front of an audience. The laughter he expected to direct at her was now perilously close to being directed at him. "Hey, I'm not done with you," he shouted, his voice now raw with anger and embarrassment. Maya didn't look back. She continued walking. She knew this wasn't over. She had avoided the fight, just as her sensei would have advised. But she had also, inadvertently, issued a different kind of challenge. She hadn't cowed, she hadn't broken, and she hadn't been easily intimidated. To someone like Kevin, that was an affront that would not go unanswered. As she boarded the bus, she found a seat by herself and stared out the window, replaying the encounter in her mind. She hadn't wanted to reveal even a hint of her training, but his physical aggression had forced a minimal defensive response. The problem with such bullies, she knew, was that their egos were fragile. A perceived slight, a failure to dominate, often led to escalation. She hoped she was wrong, but a familiar sense of resignation told her that her days of being invisible at Northwood High were definitively over. The whispers and stares would intensify now, fueled by Kevin's bruised pride. The thought was exhausting, but beneath the weariness, a quiet resolve solidified. She would not be a victim. She would continue to seek peace, but she would always be prepared to defend it. The path ahead had just become significantly more complicated. The days that followed confirmed Maya's apprehension. The incident in the parking lot, though brief and ambiguous to most onlookers, had painted a target on her back. Kevin, nursing his wounded ego, seemed determined to reassert his dominance. The bullying shifted from casual dismissal to a more concerted campaign of harassment. It began with whispers that seemed to follow her down every hallway, insidious and designed to unnerve. Rumors, baseless and cruel, began to circulate, that she was a snob, that she thought she was too good for everyone, that she was weird. Maya ignored them, her face an impassive mask, but the constant negativity was like a low-grade fever, sapping her energy. Then came the cyberbullying. Anonymous comments appeared on the school's unofficial social media pages, mocking her quietness, her clothes, her solitary habits. Photos taken surreptitiously in the cafeteria or hallways, often at unflattering angles, were posted with derogatory captions. Maya knew it was Kevin and Tiffany's doing. Their venom was unmistakable. She meticulously took screenshots, saved them, and reported the posts, but new ones would spring up like poisonous weeds. Her locker became another battleground. One morning, she found it defaced with insulting graffiti scrawled in permanent marker. Another day, her combination lock was jammed with chewing gum. Small, petty acts of malice designed to wear her down. Each time, Maya would calmly clean the graffiti or report the jammed lock, her lack of an explosive reaction seeming to infuriate her tormentors even more. They wanted tears, anger, a public breakdown. She gave them nothing but quiet dignity. During classes, Kevin would often make loud, pointed remarks clearly aimed at her, eliciting snickers from his friends and nervous glances from other students. Some people just don't get how to fit in, he might say, or it's amazing how some people can be so invisible they're practically ghosts, except when they're being annoying. Teachers, often overwhelmed or oblivious to the undercurrents of teenage cruelty, rarely intervened unless the disruption was blatant. Maya focused on her schoolwork, burying herself in books and assignments. The library became her sanctuary, a quiet haven where she could escape the relentless scrutiny. She found a secluded corral in the back, surrounded by dusty tomes on history and philosophy, and there she would read, or sometimes just close her eyes and practice the breathing exercises her sensei had taught her, finding a center of calm amidst the storm. Her resilience was remarkable, but it wasn't effortless. Each insult, each act of petty aggression, chipped away at her resolve to remain peaceful. There were moments, late at night, when the frustration would surface, a tight knot in her chest. She would go through her karate katas in her small bedroom, the precise, powerful movements a release for the pent-up tension, a reaffirmation of her inner strength. It was a discipline not just of the body, but of the mind. Her sensei had often spoken of Fudo-shin, the immovable mind, the ability to remain calm and centered even when faced with chaos or threat. Maya was putting that principle to the ultimate test every single day. A few students observed Maya's quiet endurance with a mixture of pity and admiration. One of them was a girl named Sarah who sat next to her in biology. Sarah was small, wore thick glasses, and often seemed as determined to be invisible as Maya, albeit for different reasons. One afternoon, as Maya was wiping a spilled drink accidentally knocked on her desk by one of Tiffany's acolytes, Sarah leaned over and whispered, "Don't let them get to you. They're just idiots." Maya offered a small, grateful smile. It was a tiny gesture of solidarity, but in the hostile environment of Northwood High, it felt significant. Sarah never openly challenged the bullies. She was too timid for that. But her quiet support was a small beacon. There was also Mr. Evans, the history teacher, a thoughtful man who seemed more observant than most. He noticed Maya's intelligence, her insightful contributions when she did speak, and the way she never reacted to Kevin's classroom provocations. Once, after Kevin had made a particularly cutting remark, Mr. Evans had kept him after class. Maya didn't know what was said, but Kevin was noticeably subdued in history for a few days afterwards. These small instances of support, however, were exceptions. For the most part, Maya navigated the daily gauntlet alone, relying on her inner fortitude. The bullies, meanwhile, grew increasingly frustrated. Maya's refusal to break, her unwavering composure, was like a mirror reflecting their own ugliness back at them, and they didn't like what they saw. They couldn't understand her. Why didn't she cry? Why didn't she get angry? Why didn't she just give up and transfer like other victims might have? Her resilience was an enigma, and because they couldn't comprehend it, they redoubled their efforts, convinced that eventually they would find her breaking point. Maya knew this. She felt the pressure mounting, the sense that something more significant was coming. She continued her routine: school, library, home, karate practice. She documented every incident, no matter how small, in a small, locked notebook. Dates, times, specific words, witnesses, if any. It was a habit born of a pragmatic understanding that if things escalated further, she would need more than just her word. Her sensei had taught her that true martial arts was not just about physical skill, but also about strategy, awareness, and the wisdom to choose one's battles. Maya was choosing to fight her current battle with patience and resilience, but she was also preparing for the possibility that she might be forced to fight it differently. The air in Northwood High grew heavier with unspoken tension, a prelude to a storm that Maya felt was gathering force just beyond the horizon. The escalating harassment was taking its toll, not on Maya's spirit, which remained stubbornly resilient, but on her desire for a peaceful existence. She found herself constantly on edge, her senses hyper-aware, anticipating the next petty torment. It was exhausting. The breaking point, or rather, the point where the bullies decided to escalate their tactics from psychological warfare to something more direct, came on a drizzly Tuesday afternoon. Maya was walking home, taking a slightly longer route that skirted a seldom-used park, hoping to avoid any post-school encounters. The park path was muddy and slick, and the air was heavy with the smell of damp earth. She was listening to music through her earbuds, lost in thought, when she sensed, more than heard, movement behind her. Years of karate training had honed her instincts, her ability to perceive subtle shifts in her environment. She casually glanced over her shoulder and saw them. Kevin, Mark, and another of their cronies, a burly football player named Jake. Tiffany wasn't with them this time. This felt like a different kind of confrontation, more physical, less about social humiliation. Maya's heart rate quickened, but she kept walking, her pace steady. She slipped one earbud out. "Look who it is taking the scenic route," Kevin called out, his voice echoing slightly in the damp air. They fanned out, blocking the narrow path ahead of her. Maya stopped, her gaze assessing the situation. 3 of them. The path was bordered by thick bushes on one side and a steep, muddy incline on the other. Not an ideal place for a confrontation. "What do you want, Kevin?" she asked, her voice calm, betraying none of the apprehension she felt. Kevin smirked, stepping closer. Jake and Mark moved to flank her, effectively boxing her in. "We just want to talk," Kevin said, his eyes glinting. "You've been a little uncooperative lately, ignoring us, acting like you're better than everyone." "I haven't been ignoring anyone," Maya replied. "I've just been trying to get on with my life. Something you guys seem determined to make difficult." Jake, the footballer, let out a low chuckle. "Difficult? Oh, we haven't even started to make things difficult for you, princess." He cracked his knuckles, a classic intimidator's gesture. Maya's mind raced. This was different. The taunts were there, but the underlying intent felt more menacing. They were away from the immediate eyes of the school, in a relatively isolated spot. She knew they felt emboldened. "I don't want any trouble," she repeated, the words feeling futile even as she said them. "Just let me pass." Kevin shook his head slowly. "Not so fast. We think you owe us an apology. For being disrespectful. For not knowing your place." He gestured to Jake. "Maybe Jake can help you understand." Jake took a menacing step forward, a leer on his face. He was significantly larger than Maya, clearly relying on his size and strength to intimidate. He reached out, aiming to grab her arm, probably to shove her or drag her. This was it. The line had been crossed. De-escalation was no longer an option. Maya's training kicked in, a seamless fusion of instinct and practice skill. As Jake's hand shot out, Maya moved not backward, but into the attack, a subtle shift of her center of gravity. Her left hand came up in a swift, circular blocking motion, a Soto uke, deflecting Jake's arm outwards. Simultaneously, her right foot executed a low, almost invisible ashibarai, a foot sweep, aimed at Jake's advancing ankle. It wasn't a powerful, showy move. It was precise, economical, and devastatingly effective. Jake, his balance already compromised by his forward momentum and the unexpected deflection of his arm, found his footing disappearing from under him. He yelped in surprise as he crashed heavily onto the muddy path, his bulk working against him. He landed with a thud and a splash of dirty water. Kevin and Mark froze, their jaws dropping in unison. They had expected Maya to cower, to scream, perhaps to try and run. They had not expected her to make their biggest guy fall on his face with such apparent ease. Maya didn't pause. She didn't gloat. She simply stepped back, creating space, her stance now subtly different, balanced, ready, her eyes alert and watchful, scanning all three of them. "I said," she repeated, her voice still calm, but now carrying a new, undeniable authority. "I don't want any trouble." Jake lay on the ground, stunned and muddy, looking up at Maya with a mixture of disbelief and dawning respect, or perhaps fear. Kevin stared at Maya, then at Jake, then back at Maya. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of utter shock. What did you just do?" he stammered. Mark, who had always been the least brave of the group, actually took a half step backward. The dynamic had shifted violently and irrevocably. Maya didn't answer Kevin's question. She simply held her ground, her gaze steady. She hadn't wanted this. She had done everything in her power to avoid it. But they had pushed her until her only option was to defend herself. The rain, which had been a light drizzle, began to fall a little harder, as if to punctuate the sudden, dramatic turn of events. The park, which had seemed merely dreary moments before, now felt charged with a tense, electric energy. This near miss, this brief, decisive moment of self-defense had changed everything. Maya had revealed a glimpse of her capability, and it was clear that Kevin and his friends had grossly, dangerously underestimated her. The question now was, how would they react to this revelation? Would they back down, or would their bruised egos drive them to even greater folly? Maya braced herself, ready for either. The silence that followed Jake's unceremonious fall was thick and heavy, broken only by the sound of Jake groaning as he tried to push himself up from the mud and the increasing patter of rain on the leaves. Kevin and Mark stared at Maya, their previous bravado evaporating like mist. This wasn't part of their script. The new girl wasn't supposed to fight back, let alone with such unexpected and disorienting skill. Jake finally managed to get to his knees, his face a mask of mud and bewildered fury. "She tripped me," he spluttered, more to convince himself than anyone else. Maya didn't deign to respond to that. Her focus remained on Kevin, the instigator. "Are we done here?" she asked, her voice still low but resonating with a newfound power that the damp air seemed to amplify. Kevin seemed to be struggling for words. His mind, clearly, was racing, trying to process what had just happened. The girl he dismissed as a quiet, easy target had just effortlessly taken down his largest, most physically imposing accomplice. The other students, the ones he usually impressed with his cheap displays of dominance, weren't here to witness his current predicament, but the internal humiliation was likely just as potent. He glanced at Mark, who looked pale and distinctly uncomfortable, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. Mark avoided his gaze, instead focusing on a particularly interesting puddle at his feet. This isn't over," Kevin finally managed, but the threat lacked its usual conviction. It sounded more like a desperate attempt to save face than a genuine promise of future retribution. Maya tilted her head slightly. "It can be, Kevin. It really can be. All you have to do is walk away and leave me alone." She wasn't offering a truce from a position of weakness, but from one of quiet, demonstrable strength. She had shown she could defend herself, but her words and demeanor still conveyed a desire for peace, not further conflict. This, perhaps, was what confused them the most. She wasn't triumphant, not taunting. She was simply resolute. Jake, having regained some of his composure, if not his dignity, finally got to his feet. He was covered in mud, his clothes soaked, and he looked thoroughly miserable. He glared at Maya, but there was a new caution in his eyes. He'd felt the surprising effectiveness of her technique, the way his own momentum had been used against him. He might not understand karate, but he understood falling hard. "You got lucky," Jake growled, though his voice was more subdued now. "Next time," Maya met his gaze directly. "It doesn't have to be a next time, Jake. I'm not looking for one. Are you?" Her directness, her refusal to play the victim or the aggressor, continued to unsettle them. She wasn't following the predictable patterns of confrontation. Kevin, seeing his authority rapidly eroding, seemed to make a decision. He couldn't win a physical confrontation here, Not with Maya having so clearly demonstrated an unknown skill, and not with Jake looking like a defeated mud wrestler. And Mark was worse than useless, already mentally halfway home. "Whatever," Kevin said, trying to sound dismissive, but his voice cracked slightly. "Let's go, guys. She's not worth our time." He turned abruptly and started walking back the way they had come. A clear retreat, however he tried to frame it. Mark practically scrambled to follow him, casting one last nervous glance at Maya. Jake hesitated for a moment longer, wiping mud from his face. He looked at Maya, a complex mix of emotions playing across his features: anger, embarrassment, and perhaps a grudging sliver of something else, something akin to respect for her unexpected power. Then, without another word, he turned and lumbered after his friends. Maya watched them go, her body slowly relaxing from its state of readiness. The adrenaline began to subside, leaving behind a familiar weariness, but also a sense of grim satisfaction. She hadn't sought this confrontation, but she had met it, and she had prevailed, not through aggression, but through disciplined defense. Once they were out of sight, she took a deep breath, the cool, rainy air filling her lungs. The immediate threat was over. But she knew, with a sinking feeling, that the story of Maya Alston at Northwood High had just taken another, more complicated turn. News of this encounter, however distorted, would inevitably spread. Kevin and Jake wouldn't keep quiet. Their egos would demand they spin a tale that made them look less foolish. But what would that tale be? Would they admit she fought back? Or would they invent something else? She picked up her backpack, which she had dropped in the mud during the brief scuffle. It was smeared with dirt, a casualty of the encounter. As she continued her walk home, the rain now falling more steadily, she replayed the incident in her mind, analyzing her movements, her reactions. Her sensei had always stressed the importance of reflection after any confrontation, win or lose. Had she used excessive force? No, the foot sweep was a minimal, controlled technique designed to unbalance, not injure. Had she provoked them? No, she had consistently sought to de-escalate. Could she have avoided it entirely? Perhaps, if she had chosen a different route or a different time. But the onus wasn't on her to live her life in constant evasion. The responsibility lay with those who chose aggression. The larger question looming in her mind was what this meant for her future at Northwood. Had she bought herself peace, or had she simply escalated the conflict to a new level? Bullies like Kevin didn't take defeat well. They might be wary of confronting her physically again, especially alone, but they could resort to other, more insidious forms of retaliation. She reached her quiet street, the familiar sight of her small house a welcome relief. As she let herself in, the smell of her mother's cooking enveloped her, a comforting normalcy that felt worlds away from the tension of the park. She wouldn't tell her mother about the incident. Not yet. She didn't want to worry her. This was her burden to manage, her challenge to navigate. But as she changed out of her damp, muddy clothes, she knew one thing for sure. The quiet, invisible new girl was gone. In her place was someone who had been forced to show a glimpse of her true strength. In Northwood, High would never quite see her the same way again. The ripples of that muddy encounter in the park were about to spread. Kevin, Mark, and Jake did not, as Maya suspected, keep quiet about the incident in the park. However, the version of events that began to circulate through the halls of Northwood High was a heavily distorted and self-serving fabrication. In their telling, Maya had freaked out, gone crazy, and had attacked Jake for no reason. They painted her as unstable and aggressive, conveniently omitting the part where they had cornered her and Jake had made the first physical move. Their cronies, particularly Tiffany, eagerly amplified this narrative, adding their own embellishments. "I always knew there was something off about her," Tiffany would declare loudly in the cafeteria, ensuring a wide audience. "So quiet, you know? Those are always the dangerous ones." The goal was clear: to discredit Maya, to preemptively shift any blame, and to salvage their damaged reputations by casting her as the aggressor. Maya heard the rumors, of course. The whispers followed her like shadows, now tinged with a new kind of speculation. Some students, particularly those already inclined to believe Kevin's clique, absorbed the false narrative readily. They looked at Maya with suspicion, even a little fear. Others, who had witnessed Maya's consistent composure and Kevin's group's previous bullying, were more skeptical. Sarah, Maya's biology lab partner, approached her with concern. "I heard what they're saying," she said quietly, her eyes troubled. "It's not true, is it? You wouldn't just attack someone." Maya appreciated Sarah's tentative show of faith. "No, Sarah, it's not true," she replied calmly. "They cornered me. I defended myself." Sarah nodded, seemingly relieved. "I didn't think so. They're just trying to make themselves look good." But Sarah was one of the few who dared to voice even private doubts. Most students preferred to avoid taking sides, especially when one side was so clearly the established power group. Mr. Evans, the history teacher, also seemed to pick up on the changed atmosphere. He observed Maya even more closely in class, noting the new undercurrent of whispers whenever she was near. He didn't say anything directly to her, but Maya felt his gaze was more assessing, perhaps trying to piece together the truth from the fragments of schoolyard gossip. The bullies themselves, despite their bravado and spreading rumors, were noticeably warier around Maya in person. Kevin still shot her glares, but he no longer sought direct confrontation. Jake, when he saw her in the hallways, would often find an urgent reason to look in the opposite direction or duck into a classroom. Mark simply tried to make himself as small as possible. Their fear, however, was now mixed with a simmering resentment. They had been challenged and, in a way, defeated, and their pride couldn't stomach it. They needed a way to regain their lost status, to put Maya back in her place, without risking another direct physical encounter they might lose. So, they decided to escalate their efforts to isolate and humiliate her, to make her life at Northwood so miserable that she would either break or leave. Their new plan was more calculated, designed to unfold in a public setting where Maya would feel trapped and where they could control the narrative more effectively. The upcoming school pep rally, a mandatory event held in the gymnasium, seemed like the perfect venue. It would be loud, chaotic, and packed with the entire student body. Teachers would be present, but their attention would likely be diffuse. Kevin and Tiffany huddled with their core group, devising a scheme they believed was foolproof. They would orchestrate a prank, something that would make Maya the center of negative attention, something she couldn't easily defend herself against in the moment. They envisioned her embarrassment, her tears, their own triumphant laughter echoing through the gym as their dominance was reasserted. Maya, meanwhile, continued her routine, outwardly calm but internally vigilant. She sensed the shift in their tactics, the way their overt aggression had morphed into a more covert, simmering hostility. She knew they wouldn't let the park incident be the final word. The air of anticipation, the feeling of a gathering storm, was stronger than ever. She spent more time in the library, not just reading, but observing, thinking, strategizing. Her sensei had taught her that understanding one's opponent, their motivations, their patterns, their weaknesses, was as crucial as any physical technique. Kevin and his ilk were driven by ego, by a need for control, and by a fear of appearing weak. Their current predicament, having been outmaneuvered by someone they underestimated, would make them desperate and therefore predictable. The pep rally was scheduled for Friday afternoon. As the week progressed, Maya noticed Kevin and Tiffany exchanging knowing smirks, their whispers becoming more conspiratorial. She saw them talking to other students who weren't usually part of their inner circle, enlisting them in whatever they were planning. It was like watching the pieces of a trap being set. She didn't know the exact details of their plan, but she knew it was coming, and it was aimed squarely at her. Her internal conflict intensified. Part of her, the part that craved peace and anonymity, wanted to find a way to skip the pep rally, to avoid the inevitable confrontation. But another part, the disciplined martial artist, the part that refused to be cowed by bullies, knew that evasion was only a temporary solution. Sooner or later, she would have to face whatever they had in store for her. She thought of her sensei's words, Fudo Shin, the immovable mind. Do not be swayed by the storm around you. Be the calm at its center. It was easier said than practiced, especially when the storm was being deliberately manufactured by people who seemed to delight in cruelty. On the morning of the pep rally, Maya woke with a sense of heavy inevitability. She went through her usual routine, but her mind was already in the gymnasium, anticipating the noise, the crowds, the hostile energy she knew would be directed her way. She chose her clothes carefully, simple, comfortable, allowing for freedom of movement, though she desperately hoped she wouldn't need it. As she walked to school, she mentally reviewed her options, her training. Not for aggression, but for defense, for maintaining her composure, for finding a way through the ordeal with her dignity intact. This wasn't just about her anymore. She realized that how she handled this could send a message to others who were silently suffering under the bullies' reign. The school day crawled by, each tick of the clock a countdown to the afternoon spectacle. The atmosphere in the classrooms was restless, the usual pre-pep rally excitement amplified by the undercurrent of gossip surrounding Maya and Kevin's group. Maya could feel the eyes on her, the curious, pitying, or malevolent stares. She focused on her breathing, keeping it slow and even a small anchor in a sea of anxiety. The bell for the last period before the rally finally rang. Students surged into the hallways, a wave of noise and motion, all heading towards the gym. Maya let herself be carried along, a solitary figure in the jostling crowd, her face calm, her mind preparing for a different kind of battle. The gymnasium throbbed with a cacophony of sound, a blaring marching band, 1,000 conversations shouted over the music, the rhythmic stomping of feet on the bleachers. Banners and school colors drooped from the rafters, and the air was thick with the smell of popcorn and nervous excitement. Maya found a spot high up in the bleachers, hoping to remain as inconspicuous as possible, but she knew that was a futile wish. Kevin, Tiffany, and their crew had already taken their prime seats near the cheerleaders, their eyes scanning the crowd, clearly searching for her. When Tiffany's gaze locked onto Maya, a malicious smile spread across her face. She nudged Kevin, pointing subtly. The trap was set, and the prey was in position. Maya met their stares without expression, then deliberately turned her attention to the cheerleaders, who were now launching into an energetic routine. She tried to focus on the spectacle, on anything other than a knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach. The pep rally dragged on with its usual assortment of rah-rah speeches from the principal and the football coach, awkward skits by the drama club, and announcements of upcoming events. Maya endured it, her senses on high alert, waiting for the inevitable. She noticed some of Kevin's associates moving around the gym, their movements seemingly casual but, to her trained eye, purposeful. One of them, a lanky boy named Alex, who was known for being a bit of tech geek, seemed to be fiddling with something near the sound system. Another, a girl named Brittany, who was one of Tiffany's closest friends, was whispering animatedly to a group of students in the section below Maya. The setup. The time for their planned humiliation was clearly approaching. Maya took a slow, deep breath, centering herself. She remembered her sensei's advice for facing a difficult situation. Observe, adapt, overcome. But first, Maya, always observe. Understand the landscape before you take a single step. She scanned the gym, noting the exits, the positions of the teachers who were supposed to be supervising the general flow of the crowd. The principal stepped up to the microphone to announce the winner of some trivial school spirit contest. As he spoke, Maya saw Alex give a thumbs-up signal to Kevin. This was it. Suddenly, the main lights in the gymnasium flickered and died, plunging the room into near darkness, illuminated only by the emergency exit signs and the faint glow from the high windows. A collective gasp went up from the crowd, followed by nervous giggles and confused murmurs. Then, a single spotlight, clearly jury-rigged and controlled by Alex, snapped on, its harsh beam cutting through the darkness and landing directly on Maya. She was isolated, pinned like an insect under a magnifying glass. The noise in the gym died down, replaced by an expectant, uneasy silence. Maya didn't move. She didn't shield her eyes. She simply sat there, the light glaring on her face, her expression unreadable. Then Tiffany's voice, amplified by a megaphone that someone had conveniently provided, boomed through the gym. Well, Northwood High. It seems we have a celebrity in our midst. Little Miss Maya, who thinks she's too good for the rest of us, who thinks she can just come into our school and cause trouble. Laughter, still nervous but growing bolder, rippled through the darkness. Maya could feel hundreds of eyes on her, unseen in the gloom but palpable. We heard some stories about our new girl, Tiffany continued, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. Stories about her attacking poor, innocent students. We thought maybe she just needed a little spotlight to show her true colors. More laughter. The teachers, caught off guard by the sudden blackout and the unauthorized use of the megaphone, were starting to move, their confused shouts barely audible over Tiffany's amplified voice. But Kevin's group had planned for this, stationing some of their acolytes to subtly block or distract any approaching faculty. Maya remained still, her mind working rapidly. This was their plan: public humiliation, painting her as the villain in a carefully orchestrated piece of theater. They wanted her to break, to cry, to get angry, to do something that would confirm their narrative of her being unstable. The spotlight was hot on her face. She could feel the weight of the school's collective gaze. Her heart was pounding, but her breathing remained steady. She focused on a point just beyond the blinding light, drawing on every ounce of her discipline. Tiffany wasn't finished. So, Maya, what do you have to say for yourself? Are you going to apologize for being such a violent psycho freak? The insult hung in the air, ugly and sharp. The silence stretched. Maya knew they expected her to crumble. But then, she did something they hadn't anticipated. She slowly, deliberately stood up. The movement was graceful, unhurried. In the harsh glare of the spotlight, she was a solitary, unwavering figure. She didn't shout. She didn't plead. She simply looked out into the darkness where she knew her accusers were. And then, her voice, unamplified but clear and steady, cut through the charged atmosphere. "No," she said. "Just one word. Power waiting to be acknowledged. And remember to subscribe for more tales of resilience, courage, and the unexpected ways ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things." What hidden strengths have you discovered in yourself when facing adversity?